Hey guys, welcome to the first tier list of the month March of 2023. I will make a tier list every month for Master Duel, and we will speak about the best decks in Master Duel in the current format, the best decks to climb the ladder with, to reach Diamond 1 with. So I will make a new tier list every month, and this is for this month of March. And if you have nimble eyes, you can see that I already have the Tearlaments logo, the Tearlaments symbol here. So what I will do, I will also rank Tearlaments, and I will take a guess on which of these tier categories this deck will land when we get it. So as far as we know from Decade, who has some leaks or had some leaks, and which were true the last time when it came to the Sprite package, we will get it around mid of April. So we will see if I'm right. But yeah, let's define our tier categories. So we have tier 1. Tier 1 are the best decks in Master Duel. Of course, these are decks that you can easily climb to Diamond 5 and Diamond 1 with. Then we have tier 1.5. These are decks on the brink. So a little bit more of support could help these decks become a tier 1 deck. And you, of course, can win against tier 1 decks, but sometimes you need more luck or need more skill to do so. Then we have tier 2 decks. These are solid decks, the middle of the pack, you could say. These are decks with which you can, of course, climb to Diamond 5 and also to Diamond 1. I think until tier 2, all decks can theoretically climb to Diamond 1. Some of the rogue decks can as well, but it will be much harder, and you need more luck or more skill, or both of them. So more luck means that you often need to win the coin flip and get the ability to go first, especially if your deck is a going first deck. And then we have the rogue category. I already mentioned it. In the TCG and the OCG, rogue is considered to be like, decks around the corner. They can sneak a win here and there against the top tier 1 decks, but they are not that consistent. And consistency is the main part that that differs between these tiers, because the decks here in Rogue are like way less consistent than the decks here in tier 1. So consistency means how often can you get to your combo, and how often do you brick your hand. So bricking means you have cards that you cannot use, and you basically cannot do much in your turn and have to pass it back to your opponent. And then we have the Dust It category. These are decks where I would say you could also dust it, get the gems, or get the ultra rare crafting points, and better make a new deck, maybe a rogue tier 2, 1.5 or tier 1 deck. But let's see whether we have to put something there, and let's start with our list, and maybe we have already something that can go in the dusted category. So A, B, C. And the thing is that they got an awesome support in their ABC boss monster, which was put from the ban list. Then you could use it 2 times in every deck. But the problem is that with the new banishment of the Union Carrier, this deck lost a lot of strength. So it was on the climbing tree, it was going up, but then it got hit because the game needed to hit Rune, the Sprite variant, because Sprite would use Union Carrier to make a really nasty combo, so they needed to hit it, and unfortunately they killed ABC in the process. And this deck is either a rogue deck or a Dust It deck. Given that there will not be too much support for it in the future, I would say dust it and craft another deck. So we have filled the dusted category already. So Adamantipator. Adamantipator is a deck which I mentioned in my budget tier list, or in my budget list. If you haven't seen the video, I made a video about budget decks that you can craft for very little ultra rare points. And Adamantipator is a deck I mentioned there. I played this myself a lot, and I climbed to it with Diamond 5. So this is a pretty good deck. This is still a good deck. And of course, as this will not get any new support, this will degrade even more over time. I would say for now, this is either a solid rogue deck or at the low end of tier 2. Let's put it in tier 2 and let's see what else we rank here. So the next deck is funny because this is Nordic, and I have never played against Nordic on the ladder, but a good friend of mine built a Nordic deck and he climbed a ladder with it a bit. So it has one line of play where you can make this Odin guy, and then you have an Omni Negate on the field in form of a spell trap card, sorry, and that's basically all it can do. Once you can out this board, it's over for this deck. So I would say this is more of a dusted strategy. You could argue that it's rogue, but I would honestly put it in dusted. Like the friend of mine who built this, he's like, oh, I don't care, I don't want to play a meta deck, I don't want to play a good deck, I just want to play what's fun. So he built it, but honestly I never saw this on the ladder, and I think that's, well, there's reason for it. It's not a good deck, it's not very consistent and can get broken easily. So the next deck, I myself do not really know how to play it, Altergeist, but I played against it a lot and it's such an annoying deck. It's so annoying, and I lost against it a lot because it's like a floodgate deck. It has very long games, they have always something they can do, then one of these Altergeist guys comes back from the hand and bounces a monster from your field back to your hand and you cannot attack it. It's so annoying. And even though I don't really know what it does, I would say this is at least a rogue deck, because I have lost against it with pretty good decks. I have lost against it with Sprite, I've lost against it with Branded Despia, with Sword Soul, you name it. This at least is a rogue strategy. Oh, Branded Despia, speaking of the devil, I think this is a former like best deck, tier 1 deck, and this will become a tier 1 deck in the future again, but I think for now this is a solid tier 1.5 deck. So before it was here, now with the Sprite deck and even with the Math Mag deck, which came out in January, or the support came out in January, this dropped from tier 1 to 1.5. But as I mentioned, in the future, the TCG has it already, this deck will get another wave of support. Then we have Cyber Dragon. I mean, this is a cool deck. I myself, when I played back in the days, I played a Monarch deck, and a good friend of mine played a Cyber Dragon deck, and we had so many duels with these both decks. I don't remember how often I played against Cyber Dragon. Like, my Monarchs mostly won, but yeah, it's still a fun strategy. And you also have structure decks for these that you can buy and can like make a cheap Cyber Dragon deck. But I still think this is more of a dusted strategy, or to be more exact, don't craft it. I think it's not worth building, and you won't get very far with it, as it's not very consistent and the boarded builds are not super strong. So the next category we have is Dark Magician, and I think this is a solid rogue deck now. I don't think it's better than Altergeist, so I would put it here. The reason for it is that it got good support through the Vortex of Magic structure deck, getting them the Illusion of Chaos, which made the deck way more consistent. And this is a good deck. I also talked about this in my budget deck video, which you should watch if you want to have some budget playlists. So this deck I will put into Dusted. And then we have the Heroes deck. Heroes is not a bad deck. I would say it's a rogue deck. It has some cool plays. It has the PDE, the Phoenix Dragon Enforcer, and also this guy here, Plasma. I had a cool game, which you can see in my first YouTube video against this with my Sprite deck, which was a really close one. I recommend you watch this. But this is a solid rogue strategy. It can build annoying boards, but it will not be enough to like consistently beat the top decks or make boards that no one can break. So this is by far not as strong as an Emancipator, and when putting it here I would say it's over Dark Magician but under Altergeist. So Dinos, and this is pure Dinos and this is Dinomorphia. I think Dinos is also a rogue strategy, can build quite some good boards, but it's very, very inconsistent. You can brick with it a lot. You will often have hands which you can not do anything with. Unfortunately, very, very inconsistent, and therefore it's only a rogue deck, and I would also put it here. Dinomorphia, if it gets rolling, if any one of you ever played against Dinomorphia, you know when this deck gets rolling, then it is crazy. They do the Cantogena, the Rexturm, and then you cannot activate your monster effect. So a really, really crazy deck, but I also think this is quite inconsistent, and many players who played it and I talked with, they are saying the same thing. It's very inconsistent, so I would also put it here, but I would put it above Dark Magician, the Dark Magician strategy, because in the end board this builds the Cantogena and Rexturm thing. If it gets there, then you are basically ruined and you oftentimes have to give up if you don't have a lava golem, which can break this board. But yeah, who main decks a lava golem besides of maybe some sprite variants? So Dragonlink. Dragonlink is the next deck on our list. Dragonlink will get support in the future via the Bystials, which will make it a lot better, but for now I think this is a good tier 2 deck. It can make very good and strong end boards which are hard to break, but also can be stopped pretty easily by hand traps and need a lot of combos to get to its end board. It's also not an easy deck to learn because you have to learn all the combos, and it's also not a cheap deck. So that's the reason I think that I don't see, or many people don't see a lot of Dragonlink on the ladder, because it's not that cheap, it's not that easy, but it is a strong deck who can make very good end boards. Dragonmaid, also supported by a structure deck, and this is an opinion many people might disagree with, but I think that Dragonmaid is not 1.5, not 2, no, it's a dusted strategy. Sorry, I got you. No, Dragonmaid is not a good strategy. I would not buy the structure decks. This is simply too weak, falls in line with all the other dusted decks, and I guess for a bit more investment of gems or ultra rare crafting points, you can get way better decks up here. So if going for a structure deck, I would always suggest the Dark Magician structure decks. It's a lot stronger than Dragonmaid or Cyber Dragon. But yeah, that's that. The next thing we have here is the Drytron strategy, and I think this once was one of the best decks, right? So you could argue this being a tier 2 or a rogue deck. I think at the moment it's a rogue deck, but it's a really good rogue deck. I would put it under Altergeist, because when the Drytron strategy builds its end board and has the Herald, and they have enough fairies in the hand, then it's basically over. Like, it's just over. You cannot do anything. If they have like 6 fairies in their hands, they have 6 negates, and what are you going to do then? You only have 6 cards yourself, so they can negate every card of you, and you cannot do anything against that. The problem is that when this deck goes second, that's super bad, and it also can get stopped by hand traps pretty easily, so I will put it here in the rogue category. So Eldritch, the old Doom of the metagame. It's not that strong anymore. There are stronger floodgate type of decks now, so I would put this in the rogue category. I think it's somewhere here above heroes, but not as strong as Drytron, though it depends, and my experience with Eldritch is a bit limited, so I would put it here, but not quite sure. Maybe you could argue it's above these, but I think it's here and this is its place. Then we have Endymion, one of our first pendulum decks, and this can be quite a strong deck, though you need to learn all the combos and it takes time, and sometimes the timer will just run out. I think this is still a solid rogue strategy. I would place it above heroes but under Eldritch. And then we come to Fluenderies. And the people that have seen my budget deck video, they knew I am really hyped for this. I think in the future, when the Tearlaments come, I think this is, together with another deck I will mention in a few moments, one of the tier 1 decks when Tearlaments hits, because it's a good counter to Tearlaments and it will destroy the deck, it will rival the deck for one of the top spots that I can say, or that at least is my guess. But for now I would say Fluenderies is a tier 2 strategy. It's a long time ago that this deck lost its, how was it called, Dragon Wind Barrier statue, like the wind statue that prevented your opponent from special summoning. If that would be still in the game, this would be much stronger. And also Dimension Shifter, one of the best cards against the Tearlaments strategy, was limited to 2, and this deck played 3 of them, so I think it dropped down a bit and its strength level isn't as hyped as it was before. But as I said in the budget video, and as I will say here, when Tearlaments hits, this I think goes up to tier 1. So this is Adignista, and it's often played together with the Math Mech package. Let's talk about Math Mech first, because these two go hand in hand. Math Mech, I think, it's a bit difficult. I think this is still a tier 1.5 deck, and I would also say it's a bit above Branded Despair. So let's put this here. This will become much harder when the Tearlaments come. because we get the Tearlaments with the Ishizu cards, and the Ishizu cards, for you who don't know it, they can shuffle back cards from the graveyard into the deck. And you can shuffle back cards from your enemy's graveyard into the deck as well. So they could shuffle all the Mathmech cards back into the deck, and then the deck cannot perform its core strategy, which is to summon the Laplacian on the enemy turn. So for now, this is still a very good and solid deck, but I think once Tearlaments hits, this will drop down like to tier 2 or maybe to Rogue. Though I have to say, right now in the TCG, where Tearlaments was hit with a ban list and it's pretty much out of the meta game, this comes back and seems to be one of the strongest decks. So that is that. And Ad Ignista, as I said, is like the Ad Ignista cards and the Mathmech cards together in one deck. This, of course, is also a strong deck, as is Mathmech, but I think this is more of a tier 2 deck, because the Mathmech core, in my opinion, is stronger than the Ignista core. So, in my opinion, you're weakening the deck by putting the Ignista stuff in it. So the next deck is a Labyrinth. I also talked about this in my budget video. A pretty cheap deck which will get awesome support in the future, but that will need some time. So the support is way in the future. But then I think it will be one of the best decks, so investing in it now and keeping the cards seems to be okay. For now, I think this is a good Rogue deck. I would even put it, let's put it above Altergeist. I think of these, it could be the best Rogue deck that we have right now. As I said, in the future, this will get more support. It's a pretty cheap deck, so maybe get the cards. If you have it, keep it. And then in the future, if you like to play the trap decks, then this is a pretty good deck. And I think it's also better than Eldritch. Then we have Pendulum Magicians. This is also a Rogue deck. I think it's a bit worse than the other Pendulum deck and a bit worse than Heroes, so I would put it here. Though I have never played it myself and always only played against it. So we have Phantom Knights. Phantom Knights funnily topped a tournament which was organized a few weeks ago, a Master Duel tournament, but I still would say this is a solid Rogue deck, somewhere in the upper echelon of Rogue. Let's put it behind Altergeist, because I think Altergeist is a really underestimated deck, which not a lot of people play, but which is really, really strong. So we have the Runic deck, once was tier 1, and with the Sprite Runic deck, which we'll cover in a moment, I think that is still tier 1. But the pure Runic variant, especially with the hit it got from the ban list, where Runic cards were put to 2, I think now is a tier 2 deck. I think it's better than Ad Ignista, but not as good at Fluon de Reese. And maybe, now that I think about it, let's rearrange this a bit. I would say this is better, so this goes here, because this goes, this goes here. Fluon de Reese would say it's better than this, and I think this, I'm not sure about this position, but let's keep it this way. Yeah, so Runic's still a good deck, but I mean, like, I bought the cards myself when they came out, and I was like, oh, I don't like to play the deck, it's trash. I was lucky that Sprite came, and that Sprite Runic is a cool deck, but I don't really like the strategy, but it's a solid tier 2 deck. Then we have Salamangreat, which I also talked about in the budget video. This is still a Rogue deck, but I think it's placed somewhere at the bottom of Rogue. Though I have to say, when you combine these cards with the Mathmech cards, which you can, then this is a tier 2 deck. But the pure Salamangreat deck, though, this goes here, and I would suggest, if you want to buy a structure deck, better take the Vortex of Magic and go for the Magic deck than one of these, but I also already said it. So Sprite, to no surprise, this is tier 1. When we think about which variant is the best, I think Runic Sprite is the best. Then comes the pure Sprite variant, then closely behind the Life Twin variant, and I think the worst variant for now is the Tri-Brigade variant, which I would put at tier 1.5 or tier 2. The other I would all put at tier 1. But I think when the Tearlaments strategy comes out, especially Runic Sprite will get a lot worse, because as I said, the Ishizu cards can shuffle cards from the graveyard back in the deck. That is pretty bad for Runic, because the Runic spells want to be in the graveyard, so you can yourself shuffle it back in your deck and then draw with a fountain, but that you cannot do when the Tearlaments strategy hits. So this, I guess, will become worse, but Sprite will still be good in the Tearlament format. So the next one we have is Spiral, and Spiral got good support in the Illusion of Chaos, which came with the Vortex of Magic structure deck. Though I still think that this is not tier 1.5. I think this is a bottom tier 2 deck. You don't see it that often because it's pretty expensive and it's a complicated deck, but it can build really insane and really strong end boards, which are really hard to break. The problem for the deck is a bit consistency, so I think like the bottom of tier 2 is a good position for it. Then we have Sky Strikers, which recently got some new support, and that made the deck like quite a bit better. Funnily enough, the cards that Sky Strikers got thus were cards that were only out a few weeks in the TCG, so like normally we weren't supposed to get them that early, but I think they wanted to build up some strong decks before they we're going to release Sprite and Tearlaments, so we got the new cards for the Sky Striker archetype. Though I still think this is somewhere here at the bottom of tier 2, maybe at the top of Rogue. I would say bottom of tier 2. This is not a super easy deck to learn and not super cheap, but this is a good position for it. Then we have Sword Soul, which when Sprite wasn't out seemed to be one of the best decks together with Mathmech. I still think this is a tier 1.5 deck, and I would still place it behind Mathmech and before the Despia strategy. I played both of these decks on the ladder, this as well and this as well, and I have to say that Sword Soul seems to be better than Branded because it's more consistent. Like with Brand Despia, I more often bricked than I did with Sword Soul. So Tearlament we will save for last, of course. Then we have Thunder Dragon. This is a it's a rogue strategy. If you play pure Thunder Dragon, I would say dust it because it's also pretty expensive, not that great. If you play it together with the branded cards, I think then it can be like top of rogue. That's why we put it here, like under Phantom Knight and before the Drytron strategy, but like the pure variant would be here. So let's put it here. Then Traptrix, which is pretty funny. I just got the 3 Traptrix new structure decks, which Traptrix got a great support in the structure decks and is now a really strong deck in the TCG. But over here in Master Duel, I think this is somewhere here at the bottom of Rogue. It's also an expensive deck. I would not especially recommend crafting this. It's expensive, not that strong. Better don't do it. And then we have Tri Brigade, which I think is still a solid like bottom of tier 2, top of tier 3 of Rogue category. Like, of course, the Tri Brigade together with Sprite is better. I think, yeah, bottom tier 2, top of Rogue. I guess we will put it here. Still a strong deck, was one of the strongest decks when Master Duel released or in the beginning of Master Duel. And yeah, now we have only one deck left, Tearlaments, which will presumably come in mid-April. So what do I think? This really depends a bit. This depends on, like, next week we'll get the Ishizu cards. And we'll get all 4 of them, but we do not know if they are limited, and we still don't know if the Tearlaments card will be limited. So if nothing will get limited at the start, this will be the best deck, and then we'll have to put here tier 0 and Sprite will go down, and then this will be the best deck in the entire format by far if nothing gets limited. So we saw over in the TCG where I think all cards got limited to 1, all names, all Tearlament names got limited to 1, all Ishizu cards got to 1, and Kid Carlos, which is one of the best fusion for the deck, it got forbidden, and the deck is dead. So nobody's really playing the deck, is not seeing good results at tournaments. And over in the OCG, where they didn't hit it that hard and where the Ishizu cards were not hit, this deck is still the best deck, though it is a bit weaker and other decks are also in the format. So this really depends on what they hit here and how hard they hit the deck before and then in the process. But as I said, I will make an updated tier list every month. So let's say full power, it's clear, it's over here, nothing comes close. Let's say they limit the Ishizu cards to 1 and maybe hit the Tearlament names to, let's say, 2. I think that the Sprite deck then can compete here, and it will be a close race, because what you have to know is when this came out in the OCG, like Sprite came together with Tearlaments, at the start Sprite was the better deck, but this was also because the Ishizu cards weren't out yet. When the Ishizu cards dropped, this became the better deck. So all in all, I think that this will be the best deck in the future. I mean, it depends on the hits it gets, but if it doesn't get any hits, it's tier 0 for sure. If it gets hits, then this and Sprite will probably be the best decks. And as I said, Fluonories, once the Tearlament strategy is out, will become one of the best decks. This is what it looked like in the OCG for a long time, and I think we will get something like this as well. But for now, I had it somewhere around here. Let's put this here, let's put this here, and let's keep it this way, and we will have a look in April when we know whether the Ishizu cards which we get next week are going to get banned or limited or whatever, and we maybe know if the Tearlament names will get limited. Then we can make a new tier list at the start of April. But this is the tier list for March, Master Duel tier list, the best decks, the worst decks, the dusted decks. I'm happy that you have made it to the end with me, and I hope we will see each other again in the next video.